I'm going to say as little as possible, owing to the fact that I'm losing my voice. And thankfully, Robert needs no introduction. He's well known to all of you as a professor in the department with a variety of interests in our field, so that it's remarkable that in the last 10 years we've never had you to speak on this seminar programme before. Welcome, and I'll hand over to you straight away.
Great, lovely, thanks Chris. Thanks to you and to Harry for the invitation. I should say the main application is very short, because my understanding of the ethos of the seminar is that you like to talk, and therefore I will maximise that and minimise my own splurging at the beginning. What I do want to start off with is just saying a little bit about myself and how I got into this particular research thing. I used to think of myself as working in specific areas of Christian ethics, but I've branched out into so many. I've just decided to call myself in recent times just a GP, sort of generalist applied Christian ethicist. And I work in applied Christian ethics rather than ethical method, fundamental moral theology, and so on. Quite a lot. My PhD was on political theology, and I've more recently written on sexual ethics, but quite a lot of my, in fact, in terms of time, probably most of my life has been spent on bioethics, particularly ethics at the beginning of life, ethics in embryos, genetics, and also part of bioethics, which is ethics in the life sciences, biology, and certain dimensions of the science-religion debate. I'm probably moving away from certain of those aspects, particularly the sort of hardcore bioethics stuff, or at least shifting emphasis in it, and that's for a very specific vocational reason, really, which was I was interviewed to be on the board of the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority earlier this year. And at the same time, I was interviewed for the Ethical Investment Advisory Group, which is part of the Church of England, which advises the Church on how to invest its billions of pounds in the Church committees and so on, and how they can do that ethically. Now, I wasn't mercifully appointed to the HFEA, and I say mercifully because if, as in my case, you spend a lot of your time thinking about the kinds of things that the HFEA cover, and quite often put in submissions to them, or have certainly given evidence to parallel organisations like the Wellcome Institute. You think being on the board of the authority is exactly what you're there for in life. And I have to say, because they take so long to make those kind of appointments, the civil service, they said, well, you'll hear in the new year, but then one was said to them, well, we're not quite sure which new year, but you will hear in a new year. Meanwhile, the other organisation had contacted me and asked would I be interested in applying. So I said yes, and they actually interviewed and appointed much quicker, so I said yes to them. And even when I was being told by the HFEA, no, you can't, we're not going to appoint you for very dodgy reasons, as far as I can say, but we'll go into those. But I was saying, oh, thank God, you don't have to torture yourself with trying to find the right words, saying why I wasn't the right person and so on. As a civil servant talking down the phone, I said, that's great, I'm really pleased. Anyway, so if I am going to carry on working in bioethics, it's going to be another part which has really gripped me in the last 12 months. Anyone who knows my teaching knows that the thing I've been most passionate about in the last 25 years has been climate issues and environmental issues. So the Ethical Investment Advisory Board has a lot to do with that. Should the Church be involved in fossil companies and all those kinds of questions? So if I'm returned to bioethics, it'll probably have a very substantial environmental dimension, which is not necessarily wrong. And bioethics originally, as it was first coined by Van Potter, he in his mind did include environmental ethics within it, and so that more recently, when people started talking about it as medical ethics, they actually called it biomedical ethics. Beecham Schultz is called Principles of Biomedical Ethics, precisely to make that point. It's not just about bioethics more broadly, but it's that broader sense of bioethics, which if I do turn to it, which I will go into. Now, the paper which I'm going to give is an area which, or at least is a methodology, I'll be precise, or a discipline, to be more precise, which is really almost entirely new to me. namely empirical bioethics, or rather the anthropology of bioethics. And what I'm going to give you is very much a first naivety, and it's again in terms of if you're consciousness, whatever, conscious of the other, and then self-consciousness. I'm very much at the consciousness stage. So this is a completely untheorized piece of work. The background to it was some work which was done by three colleagues: Tom Shakespeare, Jackie Scully, and Sarah Banks. Sarah's in the sociology department here, and Tom was at Newcastle, and Jackie Scully was at Newcastle. And they did some work on ordinary ethics, and that is, they want to know in real terms, how did non-elites think about bioethical issues? Not how the philosophers think about it, not how the lawyers think about it, not how the bioethical elites think about it, but just how do ordinary people think about bioethical questions. And they looked at questions of sex selection for social reasons. As you know, sex selection can be either for social reasons or for medical reasons. Medical reasons is if you want to choose a sex for your child, because if you know that if you're going to have a male, they're going to have a particular kind of condition which comes down the male line, so you'll choose on those grounds. So it's a health-related ground. Whereas other people want to balance their families, have the right numbers of girls and boys in their family, and it was looking at that second kind of question, which they were looking at and asking people how they felt about it. And one thing they discovered unexpectedly, there was a lot of people who came up with religious kinds of thoughts, and non-religious people using religious language. For example, the language of gift. A child is a gift. And they were really quite intrigued by this, and they said, actually, we want to do a second project, which will think about how do religious people think about bioethical questions. So a second project in ordinary ethics, and I was, Tom Shakespeare left, moved elsewhere, but they called on me as a religious ethicist to work with them. And what we looked at was new reproductive and genetic technologies. And we had three different kinds of research participants. First of all was faith group leaders. What did they think about new reproductive genetic technologies, and so on. Then we also had dialogue groups, where a kind of focus group, where we talked to people from particular religious backgrounds. So we'd have Methodist women, or we would have Anglicans, or we would have Catholic men, or we would have Muslims, Shia Muslims from one part of Newcastle, or whatever it was. And then thirdly, we had a group of one-to-ones. That is, people who had themselves had experience of infertility, and we were talking to them about exactly what their experience was. So we've got three different angles on how do lay, or when I say lay, I don't mean non-medical, non-professional medics. How do lay people think about these kinds of questions? Now, the bit that was of particular interest to me was the one-to-ones, because there's lots of evidence that, as well as obvious anecdotal common sense, that people respond very differently when it affects them, as opposed to when they're talking about it in general. So dialogue groups, we've got a very good sense of how ordinary people might respond to two particular questions, which in our case we asked them about egg donation and pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. And so we had a good sense of how religious people in general might think about it. But what we needed really was how do people who are actually facing the issue themselves, how might they respond to it? And of course that's a much more existential kind of question. How do you think about an area for which you've got no previous laid down forms of reasoning for? Okay? So how do lay people think about things from within a tradition, but about which their tradition says, as so far, almost nothing, typically? Now, of course, that's, to my mind at least, all extraordinarily interesting. We were not doing anything quantitative. We weren't trying to find out what percentage of people thought whether such and such a procedure was okay. Rather, we're doing richly textured qualitative interviews. Now, of this branch of the project, we had 80 interviews. Many of them were at great length, typically 30 to 50 pages of single-spaced transcripts. So these are all afternoon interviews. The data is now half a decade old. So it was done 2013 to 14 actual interviews. All the basic data was published in Human Fertility a couple of years ago. So that's all down there. But that didn't include anything of a theological nature. And in fact, I'm not really going to do much for theological nature in this paper. My real interest, as I said, is bioethics. And this is not really bioethics I'm going to do. It's just going to be background of the experience of fertility the experience of religious people facing infertility in the context of a clinic. Why am I interested in this? Well, I've long been convinced of the value of empirical work, empirical research for theological bioethics. I should say that's a term because, as were my teachers' generation, the generation of those who taught me would never have been interested in empirical stuff, certainly not doing it themselves. It was much more an armchair exercise about thinking about theology, thinking about the Bible, thinking about the Christian tradition, and seeing how that bore on particular questions. And actually finding out what people thought in real life has always played very much a secondary role for them. Whereas it seems to me that if theologically Christians believe in the incarnation, believe in discipleship, then surely it's of great interest how ordinary believers reason morally. What resources do they bring to bear on their situation? And also, theologically, we know Day of Pentecost, your manservants and your maidservants shall prophesy, and they all have a word from the Lord to speak to the church. From a leadership point of view for the church, if the church takes a stance on something, especially if that something is countercultural, it's probably worth knowing whether people are likely to follow. And because, obviously, as an academic bioethicist, I sort of have a straight main line to church leadership, and so the question for me is, why didn't they do what I want them to do? And that's an important question. Now, attending to the warp and the weft of ordinary experience is exactly what this is about. So it's not just the grand narratives, it's also the petit récit. And in this, I'm particularly influenced by, does anyone know Theodore Zeldin's work, An Intimate History of Humanity? Or in fact, anybody's work? Theodore Zeldin? He's a French historian and sort of cultural commentator, if you like. And it's a really, really interesting book. Now, it's probably a couple of decades old. What he was interested in, what I'm interested in, is how people actually negotiate the circumstances and complexities of their own lives without a nostalgic belief in the overwhelming epistemological self-evidence and persuasive force of the natural law. In other words, if you know this is the truth, why don't people just do it? Okay? But of course, people live lives, and they have to make their lives intelligible to themselves. And what the church or the Bible or Hope or whatever says is only one aspect of what's going to guide how they think. Within Christian ethics, shortly after we did this fieldwork, quite an influential book was published by Michael Banner of Cambridge called The Ethics of Everyday Life. And what he tries to do is to integrate social anthropology with Christian ethics, particularly anthropology of ethics and the anthropology of Christianity. And he's particularly trying to introduce anthropology in general and those particular sub-disciplines of anthropology, ethics and Christianity, into how we do Christian ethics. And I have to say, I find myself very sympathetic to what Michael was saying in broad outline, not because we'd actually done some of the kind of work he was talking about. His work, on the other hand, is library-based and was not based on any actual first-hand research. I would like to think that it will usher in a new era of empirically rich, thickly described normative theological ethics, but whether it will is yet to be seen. So that's the background about why I'm interested in gender terms, and I'm just going to read for a bit. This actual paper was given at a conference of dissident bioethicists that I'm involved with questions standard ways of doing bioethics as practiced by mainstream bioethicists, or philosophers or lawyers. We're looking for approaches that are more existentially resonant and less bound up with the bureaucratic assumptions of modern medicine, more open to phenomenological philosophical traditions, more open to theological and religious ways of being. And this was a symposium on elemental bioethics, which is particularly looking at questions of the enchanted, the supernatural, the mysterious, the dark, the displaced, the unavowed, which is more alert to metaphysical reductions and potentially violent ontologies. And that gives background to what I'm just about to say. The paper is just talking about one person. Okay? I quote, "And for both of us, it felt really like we suddenly stepped into a dark room, a dark place. I feel in alien territory, not bad territory, alien territory. And for me, as a Muslim, this was like the first time I felt like this about being a Muslim. Marianne, pseudonym, a British woman in her early 30s, is describing her experience as a patient in a fertility clinic. I felt stupid. The clinic, the whole medical setup, it is of course, it's very scientific. A very scientific environment. Now that's just what you'd expect or even want. But it is an environment that's not hospitable to any concerns you might have as a Muslim. These are matters that don't belong there because it's all clean and medical, and religion is not. Religion is not clean or medical. So you have to bring it in yourself by the scruff of the neck almost. And I felt awkward doing that. I felt I was being a problem. And I would," she exhales, "I'd be asked to explain why it was important to people who didn't feel it was important, and I just," exhales again, "I just wasn't up to it." A confident, articulate interviewee, Marianne was aware of having a strong Muslim identity. "We were brought up feeling very strong, very proud. That's not quite right, because it sounds, drops voice, a bit jihadi, whoops. She compares being a Muslim to the way the patterns in marble run through the stone. It's not all of me, I'm not just a Muslim, but I am Muslim. For her, Muslim identity is a real thing, something to care for. And so it's a no-brainer," she says, "that you want to make sure that carries on into the future." Her parents, in her view, are quite liberal. They placed a huge value on education for her and her sister, so that they would have careers like their brother. There was no thought that education was pointless, since they would only get married. But even so, her identity is such that it is obvious that she would want to marry another Muslim. Marrying out, even if her partner converted, would create human complications, and is not something she's attracted towards anyway. A while after getting married, she and her husband started trying for a baby. After a year or so without success, they were referred by their GP to a fertility clinic, where a doctor told her that she wasn't producing any eggs. Although she never defined herself by reproductive ability, her immediate response was visceral. Quote, "I felt cut down." Cut down? No eggs? Well, you're a waste of space, aren't you? Her social role as bearer of the next generation of the family is suddenly in question. But it is the sharpness of the turn that the consultation now takes that really catches her by surprise. So then they immediately start talking about egg donors. And we kind of went, whoa, let's have a little think here. Because you go into this, I mean, you walk into the surgery first time, you're thinking, oh yeah, a little injection, something like that will sort it out. Before you know it, whee, someone else's eggs. And you're thinking, how did we get here? Where did I sign up for this? Part of the sense of dislocation she feels is lack of knowledge about how her body works biologically. We were maybe taught it at school, she says, but then I can't have been paying attention, laughs. But on top of feelings of shame about her medical ignorance and her potential loss of social or family identity, is awareness that the question of egg donation opens up a door into a dark room about how this relates to her religious identity, whether it is acceptable in terms of Islam. Because Islam is an identity, it's all of life, she says, and normally she knows what is required of her. She says, most of the time, being a Muslim is about failing at the goals you set yourself. But on this occasion, she says, it feels different. Here she finds herself, quote, not knowing for sure, and not even having a feel for what Islam says about this. For me, that is really weird and disturbing. Her response is to take a breather to work out what she should do. But the breather, which she was still on at the time of the interview, has not resolved the sense of disease. In fact, if anything, this has increased, which she says is one reason why she agreed to talk to the research team. She says, it makes me think that actually these issues, faith issues, are important to me, but in the clinic, I can't bring them in. I have to leave them outside, and that isn't, she laughs, it isn't natural to me. Her concern is not about the professionalism or competence of the clinical staff. On the contrary, she said, she had absolutely no complaints, they'd been stellar. Nor was it that they put her under any pressure to go ahead. The only pressure she had felt was from her parents-in-law, who were longing to become grandparents. There was only one actively jarring moment in the clinic. I quote, it was actually in Ramadan, and I was in the clinic for an appointment, and in the doctor's office, and I got a bit dizzy because of fasting, I hadn't eaten yet that day. I was getting up off the couch and got a bit dizzy, and he asked what was up, so I explained about Ramadan. And he just said, well, that's not going to help, is it? Not in a friendly way, really, but just so patronising. I did feel like it was, you're here to get pregnant, now why are you doing this silly, stupid, trivial thing? And not, well, you're doing this thing fasting, I may not get it, but it's important to you, so let's see what we can do to work around it. But even this reaction of the clinician, she sees more as disapproval or tactlessness than as positive hostility. So concerns are not about the competence of the medical professions as such. Rather, concerns have two dimensions, which are related to each other. The first is about her experience of the institutional setting and the institutional process. The second about the content of what Islam teaches on egg donation. So first of all, institutionally, she finds herself being put in a track on a conveyor belt. Almost every single one of our respondents uses words like conveyor belt, track, machine, these kinds of mechanical process metaphors, and certainly she felt that. She feels though she's being fed into a machine where everyone knows what they're doing, and she's being passed pleasantly and efficiently from one clinician and procedure to the next. Everything works smoothly until she wants to ask a question, at which point she feels she had, quotes, thrown a spanner in. But that desire to ask a question then gives rise to a series of micro power plays. For example, she says, they're very good at saying, do you have any questions? Feel free to ask any questions. But you know they don't really want you to do it. Laughs, you know, God, it's 4 o'clock already, just shut up and go. Then she begins questioning herself about whether she's the legal right, given the space for discussion for raising issues. I mean, isn't it remarkable? You've gone into the clinic first time and then you're asking yourself, have I got the legal right to ask her a question? That's this sense of the level of disempowerment you're feeling. And then she feels guilty because she knows it's not the clinician's fault that they don't have the time. Similarly, she's anxious about the doctor being a male, infringing her sense of modesty, which is important to her as a Muslim woman, only then to feel guilty again that she's not been assertive enough to see if a woman doctor was available. Now, many such anxieties may well be shared by others who are not Muslim or who are not religious, of course, but they're amplified for those who do have religious sensibilities. In a vulnerable position, not wanting to create trouble with those who are offering her hope, Marion doesn't want to risk a potential conflict situation by raising questions. To initiate that conversation runs the danger of becoming, she says, quote, a huge big issue, making gestures, Muslim alert, Muslim alert. Being religious gives one's views less weight, she says. She believes this stuff, she must be mad or stupid. And being Muslim makes it worse, she feels. Internalizing the sense that even if one's views are not being treated with outright hostility, nevertheless they're being dismissed is already a form of disempowerment. What she's desperate to talk about, and this is the second concern, is how this sits with her being a Muslim. When egg donation was raised, she says, I said, well, hang on, we'll need to think about whether this is okay for us in terms of Islam. Because they're Muslim in a non-Muslim society, they have to check whether it's all right. Normally, she says, over time, with experience, you get a sense of whether something's haram or halal. You know the rules. As she says, you might not want to know that because it can give you an awful lot of leeway if you don't. Puts on instant expression, honest mom, I didn't know we weren't supposed to drink that or eat that. Tried that a few times, she says. But this was an entirely different experience. Here though, deep breath, It was probably the first time I had no idea, like no feeling for, is this right, is this not? And it wasn't that she or her husband felt that Islam would disprove it. The opposite really, I mean, we just didn't know, we were just ignorant. It was this sense of putting a foot out and suddenly realising there was no firm ground that gives rise to the language of entering a dark room, entering alien territory. Now, in one sense, it's important not to exaggerate what she experiences, particularly in terms of the attitudes of the clinical staff. She's not accusing them of rudeness or hostility. More, she says, a bit of being a bit confused and being a bit irritated, something out of line, you know. I mean, she says, I know, emphasises what hostility is like. So she's not experiencing, in that sense, from the clinical staff. From their point of view, one could easily respond by asking, well, what else is one to expect of busy, harassed staff who are constantly short of time and trying to manage conflicting demands? Particularly if one's also asking them to touch the neuralgic topic of religion. I'll just put in, as a kind of footnote, many respondents were perfectly aware of this, just to quote one Anglican man. There's a general sense that it'd be very easy in some unspecific way to run afoul of equalities legislation or to be perceived as abusing a position of medical authority, to radically flourish your own weird belief system. So he says, I suspect that what's happened is that people have kind of felt warned off, not as an intentional result of policy, but as a kind of result of synthesis of embarrassment, receding cultural experience of religion, rising perceptions of religion as destructive. So I don't want to overstate that there's any kind of hostility on the part of clinical staff. That's just not the point. But equally, of course, it is precisely when time is short that one can see exactly what is the priority and what gets squeezed out. The default assumption of the fertility clinic, we might say, is secular. And this is ironically corroborated by Mariam's observation that was, quote, there was nothing in the actual consultation or treatment or discussion that I feel would have been any different if I'd said Christian or atheist. The whole category of the spiritual or religious, or of the good as such, is invisible to the bureaucratic routines of the contemporary clinic. But the dark place that Mariam describes cannot be simply resolved by a better bedside manner, or by attention to the patient as a whole person, or the allocation of additional time for each appointment, or more thoughtful fertility counselling, or more access to knowledgeable faith-specific chaplains, valuable though all of these will be addressing some of the institutional aspects of concern. So all these things, which are good, proper, bureaucratic responses to the situation that she's describing, okay, are still not really getting to the bottom of it. For the dark room she unwittingly finds herself entering lies at the fault line of massive continental plates, which we attempt to name rather clumsily. Ancient religion meeting modern technology, discourse of the good meeting bureaucratic instrumental rationality, and so on. All subject to the pressure cooker of the experience of infertility, the subjective appropriation and negotiation of vast familial, cultural and biological determinants. How an individual tries to make sense of all this in the context of lived life, how we that is looking on as researchers or commentators, how we are to make sense of all this in the context of the multiple contingencies and particularities through which these forces are mediated, are questions to which this kind of social research may be able to make a substantial contribution. The data we collected from the project, the Faithful Judgments project I've been talking about, tells many stories like this, of how religious people reason in these situations. Faced with entirely new technologies about which their customary source of authority often have or are perceived to have little or nothing to say, we find them thinking for themselves out of whole cloth, ab initio, working out what resources they can turn to which will enable them to live with some measure of integrity. So, for example, we have Muslim women deciding whether to listen to their mothers, choosing whether their own imam or whether another will be better, consulting online fatwa banks. We have charismatic evangelicals angry with God, questioning their faith, who also argue that selecting the embryo that will be an Olympic athlete will be playing God. Having a child who most closely reflects who you are as a couple is not. I just picked that quotation because within bioethics, that's to my knowledge, not an option that's ever been pushed. And it's really interesting that you get people talking around, thought deeply about this for themselves in their own lives, who say something very substantially, which is completely line wrong, which doesn't appear in the literature at all. Catholics who've never had IVF before they're in the situation but who end up going for it when faced with a choice in real life. Catholics, by contrast, who were sent for IVF by the NHS but decided against it, subsequently learned about the Billings method and got pregnant twice by natural family planning. Muslims, who agreed that they were approaching another woman who could act as a second wife and bear children for them. A remarkable transcript. Faithful Catholics, who consistently refused to go down the IVF route, whose worst experience of a doctor was of a fellow Catholic who couldn't see why they would have a problem if he didn't have a problem. Conservative evangelicals, whose consultant turned out to go to worship at the same church as them, who offered to come round to their home to pray with them about it, but who they were still worried would be negative about their decision, because they only want to have as many embryos fertilized as will be implanted. Ambivalence, as in the Catholic woman who said, you know, I'm sure there are plenty of other people like me that are struggling with one side of it. Like I said, I haven't spoken to them, but I'm sure there are. It doesn't mean we don't want to be, doesn't mean we don't want to do go on the treatment. It just means adding another dimension to it. In other words, living that kind of tension, that kind of ambivalence. And so on. Many gradations of certainty, many changes of mind, many different sources of gravity bearing on their reasoning. Sometimes relationships are most important for some of them, sometimes adherence to norms, sometimes the desperate desire to have a child. And the research, if I was to do it, would be to look into the transcripts and just think through exactly which of those different kinds of, the best metaphor I've had for thinking about, well, how do people make these decisions? You know, if you're a faithful Catholic, what weight do you give to the Pope? What weight do you give to your mother-in-law? Those kinds of questions are, I think, something which could really be well pondered looking at these kind of transcripts in detail, but that's work yet to be done. So, thank you.